Excellent, thank you. I love all the excitement though. Before speaking, I always try and get in kind of a calm mode. So the music was the exact opposite of where my head was, but it was still a lot of fun. So welcome, as Ashley said. My name is Andrea Eels, and I'm the Director of Government and Public Affairs for APWA and head up our Washington, D.C. office. Tammy, do I get to control the slides now and click them?
You should. Can you do it?
Okay. No, they are not moving for me.
There you go. I think you did it.
Oh, excellent. Maybe my computer is just a little slow today, trying to be zen.
Got it.
So today, while I have a little bit of your time and appreciate it, a couple of things that I'm going to go over. First of all, I'd like to tell you about the Government Affairs Program, the what, the why, the who, and just fill you in a little bit about some of the great tools and resources that we have available for your use as individuals and as chapters. And then also talk about advocacy at the chapter level. And I would also love to hear from you and what's happening in your chapters. So get ready, hopefully, for a really good discussion. Not moving for me. Tammy, the slides aren't moving at all. Thank you. So what is the purpose of government affairs? I get asked this question a lot. I don't get offended by it because I understand. A lot of people think, oh, you want me to go and talk to politicians and tell them what I do, or you want me to go and talk to media and tell them what I do as public works officials. But I always flip it around and say, think of it as an education process. As the experts, you as the public works professionals can be that expert resource to lawmakers. Believe it or not, they have very limited exposure and they're expected to know something about everything. And oftentimes they come from their own career background and expertise, but it is not public works much of the time. So we need to use you as our experts and resource and have you also engage with your elected officials, regulators at every level. APWA advocates primarily at the federal level. However, the local and state levels and the chapters creating those engagements and interacting is super important. If we take the time to inform lawmakers, regulators about what laws they make, regulations they put into place, what the real world impact is on public works, and we get them to think about that with information, again, the real world experience, we can have a very positive impact and make your work easier, better, more efficient, and effective in your communities. And think about it. If not APWA, speaking on behalf of 30,000 members, and you as our 30,000 members, then who's best to do it? We also are here in the Government Affairs Program to support your efforts at your chapter level. We want to be a resource to you, and today I'm going to cover some of those resources. And then, of course, the communities where you live depend on strong advocates, and who knows those committees best other than you? You are the experts, you are the neighbors, the friends, the soccer coaches, wherever you are in your life communicating. People will ask, oh, what do you do for a living? I'm a wastewater manager. Oh, that's very interesting. I mean, that's an opportunity to take some time and educate about public works and also about APWA. Tammy, can you move the slide, please? And of course, as we've talked over the past couple of weeks, being the voice of public works to government leaders, the public, the media is a strategic goal for the association and has been for quite some time. We are all in this together. Next slide, please. So who makes up the APWA US Government Affairs team? Myself as director, and I primarily focus on transportation related issues, though of course my team keeps me apprised of what I need to know in our other areas. Marty Williams, Government Affairs Manager, who handles primarily emergency management. And unfortunately, Marty is not able to join us today due to a government affairs meeting taking place at the same time. Sean Garcia, Government Affairs Manager, focuses on water resiliency and public right-of-way. Sean, due to another government affairs meeting conflict, was not able to join as well today, but sends his regards. Michael Altman, Government Affairs Associate, focuses on workforce development issues and also is staff liaison to the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Again, Michael had another commitment today and was unable to be here. And then Charles Rena, our Public Affairs Manager, he handles media interaction and our public visibility. Charlie is here today and you'll be hearing from him in a little bit, so I'll let you wait to hear from him about more specific information on our media activities. Next slide, please. And of course, we're very fortunate also today to have the Government Affairs Committee Chair, Mike Millette, and I'm going to ask Mike to share his perspective as the GAC Chair and APWA member very involved in advocacy. So Mike, take it away, please.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up. Good. All right.
I hear you.
Thanks, everybody. As Andrea said, I'm the current chair of the Government Affairs Committee. I've been on the committee for 3 years now. Prior to that, I was in a distant life past, I was the Government Affairs Committee Chair for Chicago Metro Chapter. And in that role, actually thinking back about 10 years ago, I was where many of you folks are sitting actually back then in KC for this same training. As I was ascending the ladder in the Metro leadership role. And the one thing I wanted to make sure that we impress upon you folks right now is kind of following along what Andrea said. We are educators, we are advocates. We do this already. If you hear nothing from me, please take this back. You are an advocate for something already. Many of us work for municipal governments, state governments, local governments, as do I. I have a time where I have to advocate for my staff when it's budget process with the village administrator. I have times where I have to advocate for policies with our village board to explain to them why we should do this way, the snowplow, et cetera, et cetera. I'm already doing those sorts of things. If you work if you're in the private sector, if you are a engineer that works with governments, you sell your company, you sell your process to a government agency when you respond to an RFP. You are advocating for your company. If you're on the equipment side of things, you advocate for your product. So what we're talking about as part of government affairs is basically doing the same thing, but at a different level. Andrea used a very good hook there when talked about at the soccer match or in the grocery store or any of those sort of things. Where you see legislators is up to you. We have times where we go see them on Capitol Hill. That's nice. It's impressive. It's effective. Their staffs are there. It's very good to get in contact with the staffs of the various legislators and the committee's staffs. But also, especially for Congress people, they go back to their districts very frequently and they have town halls or they have meet and greets. They will have events with Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, whatever the case may be. You go to those events, you meet them, you say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I work for the Department of blank. Just wanted to let you know, if you have a question about wastewater, if you have a question about the transportation, if you have a question about anything related to public works, have your staff, feel free to give me a call and make those connections, because it's really about that. It's really about connecting with people, like in any advocacy effort and any relationship effort you have in your life, about making a one-to-one connection with somebody and then being sincere and honest about that. And when they call, answer their questions. And if you can't, don't make something up, right? Say, you know what? I've got this great resource at our national office. I've got Marty Williams I can reach out to. I will have him get in touch with your staff and answer that question for you. That's what we're talking about. We're really looking at the resource effort, so that when a question comes up, and this has been happening more frequently in the last 5 years than in my entire 30-odd years professionally, where we're seeing APWA folks testify on Capitol Hill. That's a very visible thing where you see Executive Director Pearson or you see President Ivers in front of a quote unquote camera in this virtual setting where a committee person from whatever staff person or whatever says, what's APWA's position on that? And Audrey will go into that a little bit on the ones we have formal positions. But again, the ability to be the first person they think of, the first organization they think of, or at least, and this is something else I'm focusing on with the committee this year, or at least in concert with like-minded advocacy groups or, other organizations, ASCE, ASHTO, IATE, those sort of things where we could speak together as a more collective voice, amplifying our positions to Congress. Because Andrea said it very succinctly, these people can't operate in a vacuum. If they operate in a vacuum, then anything that gets sucked into the intake, it may be what comes out as policy in the end. So our role is to be the voice of honesty, the voice of reason, the voice of expertise. And it's not that hard to do. You do this every day in your life already. We have tools, and Andrea will go over those shortly, that make it almost the press of a button to respond to certain calls we have for congressional action. And even beyond that, the last thing I'll say, and then turn it back to Andrea, is I mentioned partnership with other agencies or other organizations. Thinking back to what we've done on the state level here in Illinois, where we hadn't had a road bill for years. I reached out to, again, at that time, a friend I knew that from ASCE, and we decided we're going to do a Springfield event together. So it was APWA, ASCE, or hosting the legislature for a lunch, simple thing. And that still goes on to this day because we went together and put that down onto the micro level. You don't have to advocate by yourself. If this is something you're not 100% comfortable with, but you think you'd like to try, go with a friend, go with a colleague, go with someone from our staff if it's something that you think you have expertise on, and we need somebody to go with Sean to talk to somebody. Volunteer to do that. I think it's all I got to cover for right now, Andrea.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Great examples as well, and sharing how easy it is and how local truly advocacy is, whether you're talking to a city council member or you're talking to a US senator. It's all about just sharing what you do and the real story of public works. Next slide, please, Tammy. Are you able? Thank you. So, Mike mentioned our public policy priorities. These are adopted every 2 years. The Government Affairs Committee and the APWA Government Affairs staff, we go through our policy priorities, we hear from members, we hear from the technical committees, we see what's happening on the political landscape in Congress, and we try and work very diligently to come up with policy priorities that best represent you to Congress. The primary areas for quite some time that we've been advocating on are related to transportation, water, and emergency management. This cycle, for the first time, we have new statements that we're calling policymaker primers. These are not policy statements in the same lane as the others, meaning not specific policy support, language, regulatory suggestions and solutions, but the primers really are focused on issues that we hear when we're talking to congressional members and staff, such as public right-of-way, such as recycling, for instance, such as who makes up the public works workforce. We have learned over the years that Congress really doesn't have quite a full and in-depth understanding of who public works is and what it represents. So the primers are really a supplement to our public policy priorities, designed intentionally to speak to an issue and share the public works impact and the public works role in these issues. Currently, the Government Affairs Committee has worked on 2 primers, which should be ready for public consumption shortly. one on the Public Works Workforce, and one on the Public Right-of-Way 5G. Once the Government Affairs Committee and the staff go over the policy positions, rewrite them, review them based on successes we've had over the past couple of years or things that we want to see happen in the new Congress, the policies are presented to the board, who reviews and approves, if all goes well and according to plan. So as you can see listed there, surface transportation reauthorization, water resiliency, and emergency management are our priorities for this Congress, the 117th. Next slide, please. So we are here to help you, and we have lots of resources, and that's really what I want you to walk away with today, that just like we've been talking about over the past couple of weeks, APWA staff and the resources that we have, and the APWA leadership, the Government Affairs Committee, we are all here to help you with your chapter's advocacy goals and be that voice for public works at the national level. We have many different products from which you can utilize, and they are specifically written to be used at the local, state, and federal levels. We have public works research products, the priority statements we already talked about, the legislative action alerts, which literally the click of a button can take you 2 minutes to respond, a pre-written email on an issue or a bill that Congress is currently considering that we need you to speak up on. We have the Tell Your Story portal, where you can go and see your colleagues and peers' stories of things going on in their communities, share your story to give them advice and information. And we also share that information with members of Congress to be able to walk into a Massachusetts office and have a story from a public works director in the state of Massachusetts, an operator, et cetera, has such an impact, and it's very, very important. Of course, we have the Washington Report, which comes out every Monday that Congress is in session. Advocacy news on the website. Follow us on Twitter at @APWA-GovAffairs. We have the House Public Works and Infrastructure Caucus, which we work with on legislation, hosting briefings to the Hill, and those types of activities. It has to be reestablished every Congress, so every 2 years. We have gotten the official sign off that the caucus is being reestablished by our two co-chairs, Dina Titus from Nevada and Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania. It is a bipartisan effort, and we're hosting our first brief sponsored by the caucus next Friday, February 12th, virtual brief, of course, and I'll share that information with you later as well. And then when you go through the reporter, we have the standing monthly columns, the Washington Insight, GAC Insight, and Media Insight. Next slide, please. This is just to show you what our current overview policy document looks like, public policy priorities for the 117th Congress. These are quick snapshots of each policy area, but then we also have standalone policy documents at which you can take. They're PDF format. You can quickly and easily print them, drop them off by a district office, send them virtually, of course, now in this current environment, but they are there for you to use as well. Next slide, please. And quick snapshots of some of the other tools I've mentioned. The Washington Report, Tell Your Story down there, the bottom center, where you can go and click and check out stories. To the right, the Legislative Action Center. Up there now, check it out. We have 2 current action alerts. So if you haven't had a chance to respond to those, please go to apwa.net and do so. And then APWA tweets and APWA Gov Affairs. Next slide, please. And then these are snapshots of some of our current public works research. Again, these are products that are in PDF format that you can download and share or send electronically. Every state, I'm showing Missouri here, but we have a product, an infrastructure project size page for every state in the United States. The center document is What is Public Works? This has been a very successful product for us because it so succinctly shares what are the types of functions that Public Works covers? What are the costs for these types of functions? We've gotten a lot of positive feedback on that product, and you can use that again at your level with the chapters and local and state outreach too. And then the other on the right-hand side, as you're looking at the screen, is from our presidentially declared disasters. That goes through June of 2020, so it's pretty recent, though we're in the process right now of updating the statistics of every state in the past 5 years has had a presidentially declared disaster. That is a very impactful picture, and it's that type of information, data, specific stories that have the most success when we're advocating to Congress. Next slide, please. And these are just some fun snapshots, both pre-pandemic and during pandemic, of some of our advocacy in action. Board members in the top left, as you're looking at the screen, at the White House last year in March, just before we went all virtual for APWA staff. In the top center, board member Sean Ahmad, APWA President Mary Joyce Ivers, and Governor Bill Lee of Tennessee at an infrastructure roundtable event back in California last January. Top right with caucus, GAC members, and also some technical committee members meeting on Capitol Hill. And then as you continue down the screen, the bottom right, Congressman Fitzpatrick, our caucus co-chair, addressing one of our virtual briefs. Center, a transportation brief that we held last year on the Hill, just before everyone went mostly virtual for APWA staff. And then the bottom left, Congresswoman Dita Titus, our other caucus co-chair, who is addressing a virtual brief there to Congress, which we held last year. Next slide, please. So how is your chapter advocating? I would love to just take a few minutes right now if anybody would like to put comments in the chat, different activities you're doing, if you have a government affairs committee, those types of things. Anyone wanting to share and go off mute for a moment? Come on, don't be shy. I know there's lots of great advocacy functions happening out there across the country.
Anyone on from Minnesota?
Yes, Scott's alluding to the Minnesota chapter began a series of infrastructure talks for the month of February every Thursday morning at 7:45 a.m. Central Time, where they're engaging with state and local elected officials on infrastructure, and Scott spoke this morning. I see here in the chat, Arizona has a very active GAC committee. That is the truth, Al. Excellent. I have both pre-pandemic traveled to Arizona and while we've been in the pandemic, had the privilege to be invited to speak to the chapter. Super active. They hold monthly lunch and learns and do a really terrific job in engaging with their elected officials at every level, whether it be the US Senate on down. They do a terrific job. See, Jen Hughes mentions the Chicago Metro chapter has an annual visit to the state capitol. Excellent activity, Jen. Thank you for sharing. I know the California chapter does that as well, where they do a day to Sacramento. Much of that, of course, right now is virtual. But in many ways, virtual can be more effective. So don't discount it when you're thinking about chapter advocacy activities. Legislators have found, and I've heard from congressional staff specifically, that a lot of them are actually preferring this environment and may keep it once we get past the pandemic. Or do a hybrid function, because they have constituents that don't travel all across the country to come meet with them in DC and then have the meeting delayed or canceled due to an unexpected vote. Also, oftentimes the member of Congress can stick to their schedules a little better in a virtual environment, and the staff can hang on a little bit longer. So do that outreach even during the pandemic. Take the time, connect with the district staff, pick up the phone, shoot an email, tell them you're a local resource and you want to help, and tell them about Public Works. Janine, I see you would like to speak.
Yeah,
Please,
sure.
share.
Thanks, Andrea. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, thank you.
I'm Janine Clancy. I'm the chapter delegate for the Minnesota chapter, and I'm also on the Water Resources Committee. And one of our past presidents, Kristen Asher, and our Government Affairs Committee has designed this infrastructure chat program that Scott was talked about a little bit, and Andrea, you mentioned. And one of the things that I really like about it as a public works professional is that you can see there's a number of speakers. And so no one person needs to feel like they need to lift the whole conversation. So we had a whole bunch of people there. Each week we're going to have a different topic, and it just makes it a lot easier when, like for example, I have 5 talking points I have to make. I don't have to make 25 talking points, just 5. And I think that's really a great way to handle it. So I'm excited about this. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for sharing, Janine. And I attended this morning's Minnesota discussion on infrastructure, and it was fantastic. When you're having these events, don't be shy about inviting me or a member of my team, because we learn in these, even if you don't need us to speak or do anything but listen. We learn so much information about your day-to-day work, and it's so helpful to our efforts. I'm seeing really terrific comments here, and I only see my face on the screen at the moment, but I hear like maybe somebody's wanting to speak.
Oh, Andrea, one comment on what happened this morning in the Minnesota chapter. Each of the panelists are experts in their own area. And what we always speak about is that people don't even realize how expert they actually are. You just speak about what's happening in your own city, road miles, what's happening underneath your streets, how you're constructing it. And that's really important stuff that state legislators want to hear about.
Yes, thank you, Scott. Excellent points. Again, I see lots of good examples. Legislative days going virtual in May in California, action alerts in Pennsylvania, visit with the governor's office in Iowa. I want to point to one in particular that Tara posted here from the Washington chapter. The Washington chapter is super engaged. I've had, again, the privilege to visit with them both virtually and in person. And Tara's commenting, they sent a letter to the Washington state government recommending that public works professionals be included in an early round of vaccinations. We have been doing a lot of work on that front and getting a lot of inquiries from members. And just to clarify for you, that the CDC did put in its recommendations that public works be included as a priority group in one of the early phases. But the distribution and prioritization takes place at the state level. So it's super important to do like the Washington chapter is doing and contact your governor's office or state departments of health, whomever it is that is in charge of that, and share with them the specific jobs that are public works jobs that have a higher risk of exposure to COVID-19, and or if those workers were not able to go to work because they're sick with the virus, what happens to those services? So thank you for sharing that, Tara. Excellent example.
You're welcome. I should add, though, that we did not get included in the stage that we were hoping to be included in. So
okay,
fingers
well,
crossed
don't
for
give
the
up.
next stages.
Yes, don't give up, and please let us know how that goes.
You bet.
Thank you. I believe all the chat information and great ideas being shared here will be saved. And of course, the session will be recorded, but reach out anytime. I do want to make a couple final points before handing it over to our next subject for today. A lot of chapters are aligning with the APWA strategic plan. I know the Georgia chapter and several others that have aligned, and they find that as a good roadmap and a guide, the voice, the value, the education and the credentialing, the membership focus. If that works and you think that helps give you direction and a roadmap for your advocacy efforts and other APWA chapter efforts, please do so. Again, here to help, want to give you all the resources and tools we can. It's also super important when you get involved at the chapter level in advocacy to have a particular focus. Identify what your goal or goals are. Don't try and take on the entire world at one time. That's impossible. I always suggest take 1 or 2 really important efforts or have some strong messaging around it. Like we talked about Minnesota, they have the Minnesota 2050 Raise Our Grade, which their infrastructure discussions are based on. That's a very specific focus message that they can come together on, find partners around the state to work on, and successfully advocate to every level and to educate the public, policymakers, regulators, etc. So don't overwhelm yourself or your chapter with too many goals. Pick 1 or 2 projects. to really go full bore on and have fun with it. Get out there and share your expertise and come up with some really cool and innovative pandemic events. And then when we're out of this, we can get back to doing more fun things in person. Next slide, please. Okay, the slide we jumped over was shown already. That was from the Minnesota events this morning, but I just had to include some pictures of that because I thought it was just such a cool event. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned earlier, we're having our first virtual brief for this year, our brief to Congress next Friday, February 12 at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. CEO Grayson will be our moderator. APWA President Mary Joyce Ivers will be participating as well. GAC Chair Mike Millette, whom you heard from earlier, will be speaking. So will Joe Jaron, who's a member of our Big City County Forum with New York City. And then we have Allison Abel from Parkville, Missouri, who will be speaking on behalf of small cities and rural communities, as she is the chair for that group. As it says there, you need to RSVP to Michael Altman. His email is there on the screen in order to receive the participation link, but please join us. We'd love to have you as we talk to Congress about public works and infrastructure in the 117th Congress. Next slide, please. And I thank you again for your time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Reach out to me anytime. And I really appreciate your listening today and all of your time, commitment, and efforts back in your communities.